Hello, welcome back to the detailing bay and part 2 of our paint correction episode. Last time we looked at light swirls, wash marring and light defects, and this time we're looking into those deeper, heavier defects. As always, Dave is with me. So Dave, how do you know if it's a deeper defects that you're dealing with?
So if you've known where the impact has come from, so like heavy defects tend to be like impact marks, key marks, stuff that's gone that little bit deeper. Sometimes you'll be able to feel it, which is a good indication. And also the roughness, the colour of it as well. And this is where it gets to that point where it can be a little bit of trial and error. To fully know, has it or hasn't it gone through? There's only a couple of ways to find out. One of them is to try and remove it.
Is there something like in trying to feel it with your fingernail, if you can get your fingernail?
Yeah, but you can get them where, I mean, I've had it where you can feel it with your fingernail and you've been able to still get it out. But that's at the very far side of having experience doing so.
Yeah.
So there are definitely different levels to the ability of, heavy defects and how far before it is too far. But I always say to everybody, if you've kind of in the back of your mind got that, hang on, someone's keyed my car, for instance, the only option is paint. Why not, for a small amount, try and see if you can, you can remove it or get it to a level where you're thinking, do you know what, it's not that bad anymore.
You can live with it.
And cause it does carry like heavy defect removal always carries the greatest of risks because you're removing a lot more, you're going a lot further, and it's working that. I guess it's just accepting that risk you may go through. Yeah. That's always the risk.
So take us through the correction process then. So you've found a scratch, it's too deep to just, buff out quickly and easily. Yeah. You've identified it as a deep defect in the paint. What's your first step?
So the first step is, if you have the luxury, is to take some readings. If more than anything, even on a basic level like paint depth gauge, is just to get an idea how much you're taking away at a time. So once you've kind of done your research, you've measured a thinner area like a door shut, where the scratch is, the back of your mind now you've got a rough indicator of how much clear you've got to play with.
Is it something that anybody can deal with? I mean, you just touched on this. It depends on your experience. But can anyone give it a go? Anybody
can. As long as if you've never done it before, then I advise there's fantastic videos out there on how to tackle it, the best way of tackling it. Heavy cut compounds and a heavy cut pad is a very slow, hard. It's probably the hardest approach really because it takes too much time, and then you kind of get in everything too hot and bothered the paint, and you risk swelling as well, which is going to give you an unrealistic outlook of where you're at. So the best and quickest approach is going that next level up, and it's using some form of heavy abrasive, the options are like Trizact discs.
Well, that was just going to bring me on to what tools, equipment do you need?
Yeah. So
saying, we're going down the wet sanding.
So Trizact, if you want to do it with a machine, that can give a nice flat finish, a nice even finish. It also can be very daunting as well. You're suddenly cutting a hell of a lot quicker. You're taking microns at a time off. It's not a delicate approach, but it will give you a nice flat even finish.
So with wet sanding process, what's your actual step-by-step process?
Obviously differs depending on what approach you're taking, whether it be a block or like Trizact. So for me, like I said, Trizact seems to always be my kind of weapon of choice. For me, machine-wise, you've got to use a dual action. You want a mini one. You want to make life easier, I've always found using the 3-inch Trizact discs just that little bit easier, a little bit more refined in terms of not as clumsy. Unless you were doing full cars, there's no real need to go for the bigger discs. With that, they have got a slight sponge back, but I use a ShineMate interface pad on a Virtual 12E. So it's 12mm throw, 3-inch machine.
Backing pad, will it stop it catching edges as much?
It just makes it a little bit more forgiving. It just gives it a little bit more impact should you come over any sort of contours or anything that's uneven. It tends to, I find, gives it a more even finish. Body shops will go the other way and go really firm and that, but I've always been a firm believer. It's always worth that. Just having that back in just gives you that.
Conforms a little bit.
Yeah, because it takes some a hit from the pressure of you as well. You can't guarantee that you're always putting the same amount of pressure on. If you've got nothing in between there, that little bit more, a little bit less pressure will start to give you a slightly uneven finish.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, yeah, interface pad, put the Trizact disc on, And then you don't want to work too big an area. So if, say, the scratch is covering the length of a front door, and then, like, say, for instance, like your average size car, I'd tend to break that down into 2 sections. Then you just want to wet the area up. Start off slow. There's no need to go to silly high speeds or anything like that. Keep it nice and slow so you can control it as well. And the key, really, like the polishing, is to stay very even, steady passes. Don't be like erratic, going all over the place, because that, again, is going to cause you to have an uneven cut, especially something that cuts a lot quicker. So if you're confident enough to hit it with, say, a Trizact disc, the process is very simple. It's just, once you've got your pad on your machine, it's keeping that panel moist and inspecting your area. Every now and again, give it a wipe down, but let it fully dry out, because initially it'll look like you've not done too much, but once it dries out, because again, water will fill them slight voids, but once that all dries out, you'll see the flatness come through.
At that point, you can really see in it whether
you can see where you've gone. And you're never going to get it perfect first time, but it's learning from that and knowing these things. I remember doing it the first time, and I'm quickly wiping and thinking, I've not done that much. And I'm going back on, spraying again and going back on. But it's only that, like, when you wipe it, let it dry out, and you're like, actually, that is where I need to be. And then, like, the other approach is, like the hand technique with wet and dry and a block. The good little tips with using wet and dry is, again, use it wet. Get a bucket. I always put a touch of shampoo in there. Just helps, like, lubricate it a little bit. I let the sheets soak for a little bit. Again, makes them a lot easier and less brittle to work with. And then you'll get a sanding block. We'll all have seen them. You can get different grades, some that will bend easier than others. Which one you pick purely depends what the panel is like. If it is a perfectly flat panel, then you can go with quite a rigid block. If it's, if it's on a wing, say, for instance, you want that little bit more forgiveness, then go for a slightly more flexible block. And you just wrap the sandpaper around that. And then again, you start blocking that back and forth motion, trying to keep it even. Don't be, again, sporadic. Same as the machine.
Are you using a lot of pressure, or are you just...
No, you don't. No, you want to be consistent. And this is where it takes a little bit of time, is because for every time you change your pressure, you will be taking a little bit more. And that's when you come, if you've done it and you're listening to this and you look and you're like, it's flat, but it looks inconsistent, is because pressure's changing, and that is causing that. It's like when you see people doing it with just the hand and they think that's fine. But what they'll find is at every point of that paper where their fingers are touching that paper is getting more than the bits that aren't, and then it gives you that uneven finish. And the problem is that uneven finish can chase you all the way through to the finish as well. So that's why it's so important to just take that time. And what you can do, if you're doing it by hand, is then gradually bring it back. So you can be it's a little bit more clumsy by hand. So there's that more need for refinement with paper. So say you go with 1500, I'd then take it to 2.5, 3. And if you've got the luxury, 5, because when you come for that compounding stage, it's going to make it a hell of a lot easier. You're going to be a lot more even, less likely of any sanding marks being left in there. And the finish is going to be so much better.
Yeah, to a point where you're going to want to do the rest of your car that way, even if it's not I got to do.
And that opens up a whole new can of worms.
Yeah. So delving a bit deeper into the compounds to get rid of that, to bring your paint back.
Yeah.
What's your compound of choice? I know it depends how far you've gone to begin with, but can you get away with using something like a Cut Force Pro that'll take 1500 grit mark?
Yeah, as everybody. Yeah. But always be careful what they say on the bottle when it comes to the bold claims of what they will remove, because that is so dependent on the paint type again.
Right.
So you've got to have that in mind, but you have to start somewhere as well.
Yeah. So what's your compound of choice if you've done a deep, heavy correction?
See, me, I'm always a fan of Menzern, and the Cut Force would definitely be one, because I want to see what it can do as well. But if the paint was starting to be quite temperamental, for instance, it just wasn't getting it, then I'd start looking at maybe a non-diminishing heavier cut, like the Roops DA course. Isn't necessarily got more bite as cut force, but it's got a more continuous bite. It's non-diminishing, so you're going to get that heavier cut for that little bit longer.
Work it a bit longer, yeah.
But going down that road, again, like the sanding stage, be mindful that how that's going to leave the finish to like a non-diminishing compound. A non-diminishing compound can make you look a little bit like you're going further than you're progressing better than you actually are, but because it's glossing, but you're not actually, when you start looking at it, if you get any sort of lights on there, you'll see that it's glossy, but it's still looking like a little bit flat.
A bit
if
milky.
That makes, yeah. So yeah, process of the heavy cut stage, you can go with foam, you could go with microfiber, you could go with wool. It's totally up to you. If you're new to it, then I would say a dual action with microfiber is one that's going to give you the most cut. If you're doing it day in, day out, then you probably are just hitting it with wool on a rotary. It's going to make a little bit more of a mess, but it's going to cut that back a lot quicker. And then once you've picked your compound or the compound you're going to try, the process is prep your pad as you would normally, prime it with either a priming spray or prime it with the compound itself. Just do loads of tiny, minute little dots and then 4 or 5 pea-sized dots. And then, like you would correction-wise, keep it to, I mean, it does depend on how big but you want to polish outside the area you've been working on as well. So kind of stick to that 2-foot area sort of rule. And then I tend to do like 4 passes. What you'll find is, or what I tend to do is, say 2 square foot area, the area that you've sanded is kind of in the middle of that. I tend to slow even more when I'm going over that area. It's almost like this, like you want to blend it a little bit to again take away from that. You're removing texture. You don't want that a line like basically.
50-50.
Yeah, where no texture. Yeah. So that's why you go a bit wider with the sanding stage, but also when you're compounding as well, just go a little bit further out. And then you may have that problem where it's worth just doing the whole door, because if the door's got like swirling in there as well, then work to that, or work up to a more of a bit of a full stop, like a swage line, somewhere where you've not, it's not panel to panel, so to speak, where light reflects off it. And then, 3 to 4 passes, and then inspect the area. With a dual action, it's more than likely that you might just need to give it another cut. It does depend how much you refined it back with, because the same as like blocking with wet and dry, with Trizac, you don't have to stop at 3, you can take it to 6. The further you take it, the easier that compounding stage is going to be as well, and the clearer the finish is.
So you need your Trizac or whatever wet sanding disc that you're going to be using. You need your pads and different combinations, compound, and then your choice of machine. What machine would you go with? Would you go with rotary for that extra cut?
I'd start with, for the Trizac stage, if you're going to go down that route, dual action. It's just going to give that finish. You don't really want to be doing it with a rotary. So once you've got that flat finish and you've gone, okay, I've got rid of it here, or I've got it to a level where I think that's going to come out all right. Personally, me, rotary just for speed, just to bring it all back. But there is no right or wrong to get into that end stage, really. A dual action will take longer and probably more hits to fully bring it back. But if you flattened it off nice and level and it's even throughout, coming back with even a dual action with like Menzena cut force, for instance, will bring it back really well. You just got to be careful that you don't try to move too quickly, because you can end up with like a clear but quite flat looking finish. So you have to be quite gradual with it, how you bring it back, and then you get these fantastic results. But it is also worth remembering that whilst removing deeper defects, you're also taking texture. So if your paint is quite heavily textured, to be mindful of that, and to maybe look at not just working that small area, just widen it up just a little bit. Otherwise, it's going to stand out a little bit.
Yeah, if it's isolated, you're going to have this lovely, absolutely flat, wet look gloss, and then a bit of orange peel all around it. I think once you've seen like an ugly scratch on your car, if you get it 80% better, you're all of a sudden happy with it. Yeah, you've still got a bit of a scratch on your car, but it's like I'm living with one now that I just took out, and it looked so ugly. A lot of it would just transfer from the other car that's scuffed my bumper. And even as soon as you get that off, you're winning almost. But then to get further scratches out, you really need, there's only you that knows it's there at the end of the day. So there's still a result, even if
you can round them off a lot of the time. So even if you've not quite got the ball yet to go all the way, you can take it to a level where it's more round off. So you've not got these jagged edges anymore. So it's not looking as ugly. You can still see a mark in the paint, but it looks like it's pressed in more now than it does like a sharp, horrible, ugly scratch. that is another, I guess, a thing to mention is like, yeah, that assessment, that making sure you know where you want to go with it. Don't go in blind, kind of have a plan. Otherwise, you may end up pushing it too far. But the best ones always are if I can't get it out, it's having pain, then, be a bit relaxed on the fact that, take it as far as you go, see if you can get it out.
Last question before we wrap this one up. I'm going to throw you a bit of a curveball on here. Can you correct scratches that are in matte paint? Is there anything you can do with it, or is it just paint?
No, there's a few people in America, and it's one that always fascinates because you'll get people arguing, and a lot of people arguing have never done it, but they're not thinking the process through properly. And then there's other people where they've gone and said, listen, we had this defect and we did machine it. This is the process. You're not going to take away that matte finish in the second that abrasive hits there, but you are going to change that finish ever so slightly. So while it's not going to go gloss, it's going to go a slightly more
like a satin.
you're going to get more of a sheen from it. And then you've got to think the same as a painting would. You'd have to blend that as well, otherwise it's going to stand out in a different way. So I do know a few details, mainly in America, who have hit matte finishes with certain abrasives to deal with very light stuff. But deep stuff, there is no other way. That's the unfortunate thing with matte satin finishes is once it's broken into the paint, the only real way is to get it repainted, yeah.
Right. Well, thanks very much for listening. If you're tackling your own paint correction or detailing job, we've got a growing collection of podcasts and you can revisit them through Spotify, Apple or Amazon. We also have our YouTube channel, The Detailing Bay, and that is home to our detailing videos. So thanks for listening. Join us next time. Bye-bye.